Okay, so we have covered innovation. Now you understand that innovation takes on a number of different forms, and you also understand that innovation doesn't necessarily equal invention. But you do understand the 10 items that are necessary to make sure an innovation can actually be used to build a market. Now, this is a good place to take a break. If you want, you can just click on the little audio signal symbol and put it on pause to take a break. Otherwise, if you want to keep going, let's keep going. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is the other part of the equation. Remember we said earlier the value equals problem plus solution, innovative solution. So finding a market for a solution is, of course, key to making sure that we have a marketable solution, something that can be turned into a business. And there's no better way to do that than to make sure from the very beginning we're focused on a problem, a real problem. We need to know what the problem is. Whether the customer knows about the problem or not, there has to be a problem we're solving in order to create value. Without that, we won't be able to create value. So the key piece here is how do you identify a place where we can apply some sort of innovative solution? Where are the markets for our innovation? Or maybe conversely, what problems do we need to solve in what markets? And now let's think about our innovation. One way or the other, we need the combination of some sort of problem to go along with our innovation. In looking for the right problems to solve to build a business, we need to also determine whether or not the market where that problem exists is something where we could actually build a competitive business. One of the best ways I've ever seen that describes a market in terms of whether or not it has some softness and there is some ability to accept new entrants with new innovations is what's called the Porter Five Forces model of competition. This was actually developed by a gentleman whose name is Porter back in 1979. So this idea and this model has been around quite some time. And even to this day, it endures as probably the easiest way to represent a market, to determine whether or not competition will in fact be effective. So the five forces are described in this diagram. It basically has on a horizontal axis three items: threats of new entrants, industry rivalry, and threats of substitutes. And then on the vertical axis, it's got also three items: bargaining power of suppliers, industry rivalry again, and then bargaining power of buyers. So basically the axes break down between suppliers and buyers, substitutes and entrants. And we'll talk about each one of these in turn. So what we're trying to do is determine where there's some competition weakness in any one of these five items, and then also figure out whether or not we have more than one, or at least one on each axis. So let's take them one at a time. So on the horizontal axis, threat of new entrants. So let's say we actually create our business and we're competing in that market, wherever market we're serving. We have our innovation and we're solving a problem. It's creating value. Well, as soon as we start doing that, people are going to notice. They're going to notice that we're acquiring customers. They're going to notice that we're creating value. They may even figure out how we're doing it. And then they think, well, we can do that too. We've got enough money and time and resources that we could do exactly what they're doing. So let's go in and let's do the same thing. So that would be a new entrant. That's somebody who isn't there today, not competing with you, but they become your competitor because they see that there's an opportunity. So that's threat of a new entrant. The center one is industry rivalry. In the market you're in already, you're trying to capture market share. Oftentimes you're taking market share from existing suppliers in that market. So that's industry rivalry. They're trying to do the same with you. Obviously, once a company becomes a new entrant, they move into that center place, they become a rival. instead of a threat. And then on the far right-hand side, we have threat of substitutes. And this one's a little harder to understand. But basically what it means is that at any one time while you're producing a product or a service, there's probably other ways that your customers can do the same thing. They can achieve the same value without actually being a competitor. So let's say, for example, you're in the hamburger business like the McDonald's, and you're competing against McDonald's. Well, clearly McDonald's is going to be an industry rivalry. But over here on the right-hand side, threat of substitutes, it could be something entirely different. It could be somebody that supplies hot dogs or sausages or banh mi. It could be another form of food, fast food. It doesn't have to be hamburgers. So the consumer, your customer, can choose to go over there and buy a substitutional product instead. And over time, people may favor to buy that type of product instead of your hamburgers. And in fact, that's what happened with the McDonald brothers. At the time they went into business, most people were buying hot dogs. They began to understand that something new and different like a hamburger was very exciting and that people actually liked it and preferred it over a hot dog. So they became a substitutional threat to the hot dog suppliers. On the vertical axis, we have bargaining power suppliers and bargaining power buyers. That's fairly intuitive. So for example, on top, suppliers, if you have a lot of different people who make the same product or provide the same service, then they don't have a lot of bargaining power. You as the buyer, you can always go and buy it from somebody else, and therefore you can use that to your advantage to create a good, strong negotiating situation to get the lowest possible price. So if you work in a market that has lots of suppliers, then you're going to have power in bargaining. On the other hand, on a market that says bargaining power of buyers on the bottom, that's a whole different ballgame. Maybe in the market you're working with, the buyers have all the negotiating power. In this case, it might be that there's very, very few buyers, or maybe only one buyer, and therefore they have a lot of negotiating power as to how much you will be able to sell to them for. You're not going to be able to sell to a buyer and charge a lot of margin if they're the only buyer or there are very few buyers. On the other hand, if there's lots and lots and lots of buyers, then you have probably a better chance of negotiating a better price. So looking at these four items on the periphery and the one in the center, you want to find markets where you've got preferably two or more areas of weakness. And they're going to be on different axes, probably. So for example, with Walmart, Sam Walton's company, he had tremendous bargaining power with suppliers because he bought products that were supplied by low-cost suppliers all over the world. So one of the things he had working for him was the bargaining power suppliers. And he eliminated rivalry and also created problems for new entrants by adopting his low-cost strategy. So yes, he was able to create a huge amount of strength in his business by taking advantage of the fact that the existing suppliers weren't using low-cost strategies. So Sam Walton looked at this diagram, probably not this particular one because it was invented after he started, but he thought about these things in principle and realized that he had a lot of softness in those two areas, and he took advantage of them. So when you're talking about a market that you're going to participate in, you're going to solve a problem in, you want to try and find whether or not there's weaknesses in any one of these points. If you don't find weaknesses, a place that gives you an advantage, some sort of power, then you're probably not going to do well in that business. So I would say take a look at the Porter 5 Forces competition framework before you decide to compete. So how do we find a market where we want to compete? Now, clearly, we have to solve a problem. That's key. Once we know that we can solve a problem, we need to apply the five forces from the Porter model to determine whether or not it's an attractive market to compete in. But finding a problem to solve oftentimes can be pretty challenging. The way to do it is basically to keep your mind open, to listen to problems that people are talking about. You want to also try and find things that are not so obvious. If the problems are obvious, then people are going to solve them. There's going to be a lot of people realizing that there's a problem and they're going to be trying to address it. So you want to try and find problems that are not necessarily the obvious ones. You want to listen to people complain. You want to hear them talk about the difficulties they're encountering every day. These are the kind of things that you want to pay attention to. So complaints and difficulties are oftentimes an indication of where there's a problem that you could solve and make a lot of money. You need to find out whether they're talking about poor quality service or whether they're talking about just poor quality from the product. It breaks too much, it's not reliable. Or if you're talking about difficult procedures, it takes a lot of time and energy and effort to do something. These are things you want to look for. Things that people are complaining about because the service, the product quality, or the procedures just are causing them lots of trouble. Now, you also, when you're looking, you don't want to be fooled into thinking that what you hear people talking about today is what's going to be big tomorrow. So technology and capabilities change over time. We have to be aware of what those changes are and where they're going. So for example, many years ago, the way people got around Hanoi was largely on bicycle. In time, more and more people got around on motorbikes, and that's the primary way people get around now. In time, fast forward into the future, we're going to see more and more automobiles. We're seeing them now, but eventually that's going to become the primary mode of transportation in Hanoi. So let's think about what that means. If when bicycles were quite common, you decided you want to be like the Wright brothers and open a bicycle repair shop, you'd probably have a lot of business. You'd probably also have a lot of competition. It'd probably be very difficult for you to provide some sort of innovation. But if, on the other hand, you noticed an emerging trend with people buying motorbikes and you went into the motorbike repair business, then you would be able to actually innovate, to create some new ideas around how to do motorcycle repair or motorbike repair. In fact, you could grow a business very rapidly because there wouldn't be much competition. And as the market for motorbikes grew, you could grow with it. So that's a better place to compete. So now, what about cars? Maybe that's a good place to be. You could be in the sales of cars, the manufacturing of cars. You could provide petrol for cars. You could provide maintenance for cars, repair for cars, cleaning for cars. Lots of things you can do to build new businesses in an emerging market. So we find these opportunities mainly by reading and listening. So you can listen, you can hear what people are saying, you can also read, or you can subscribe to news services and blogs. And that's where we find most of our information about emerging trends. What are the disruptive technologies that are emerging? What are the demographic changes, like people growing older? Well, that's kind of a cool thing because people are growing older. That's very predictable. And you know that today there are much more young people in Vietnam than there are old people. And so over time, guess what? All those young people are going to become old. And that gives you an opportunity to create businesses today, which will grow over time to serve the needs of older people. And it's not hard. You can just look at other countries like the United States and see what types of products and services are being offered to old people today. Yeah, changing laws. New laws create opportunities. They're changing all the time. And each time a law changes, it creates a new business opportunity. So you can stay on top of that. You can even become a force in molding and shaping those changes. Economic factors and affluence. Uh, Vietnamese people are becoming more and more affluent. They're getting more money. It wasn't until a couple of years ago that Vietnam as a whole was rated as a relatively poor country, an emerging market. Now it's rated as a lower middle class country, which means you have more money. And that's just going to continue. As you grow older, you're going to move out of shared living to your own house. You're going to raise your own children. You're going to have cars. You're going to have wonderful entertainment systems. As you grow older and become more affluent, have more money, there's going to be new demands you have that you don't have now. And that provides opportunities for businesses. Neighborhoods. Well, neighborhoods change all the time. In fact, they get torn down or they get built anew, they get improved. Sometimes new transportation systems emerge in them. All these changes create new opportunities, and you can build businesses that take advantage of those. When looking for markets, there's really no substitution for knowledge. The more we know about a particular market, the more easily we can see those not so obvious problems. We can also find ways to innovate in those markets in ways that most people won't be able to see because they're not as knowledgeable. So really, at the end of the day, there's no substitution for very deep knowledge and skill in a specific market. And that's why people who are actively involved in markets and who have been participating in them for a number of years oftentimes are the ones who are the leaders for innovation. So the numbers are pretty simple. Over 2/3 of markets that are identified are done so by people who already work in those markets. Either they have a job in that market or oftentimes it's a hobby for them and they turn that into a new business with innovation. And also another way they can get that is through family members or friends. You don't have to be the expert. You can actually have a friend or a family member who is the expert and they help you understand and see the problem that needs to be solved. They can also help you see the innovation even. They can be the one who tells you about it. So basically we have to find out two questions. One is, what does the customer need or want? And secondly, where is there room for innovation? These two things can be actually answered very easily by someone who is deeply knowledgeable in a particular market. They see them very clearly. There's not a lot of need for research. Another great area to find places to innovate and market applications is your customers. Listen to your customers. Your customers have very deep knowledge and skill in the market they're in. That's their job. They're the ones who live with the problem every day. They have the experiences and they know the environment. And if you listen to what your customers tell you, they will in fact tell you where their problems are. They will tell you whether they have problems with efficiencies or high costs, or if the products they buy have reliability issues or quality issues, if the services they receive aren't working well or they're unreliable. Your customers will tell you about these things. All you need to do is find ways to listen to them. Now, the interesting thing is, even though they know what the problems are, most of the time they don't necessarily know what the solutions are. If you listen, sometimes you'll get some ideas that steer you in that direction. In fact, like I said earlier, you might actually get a well-defined solution, but they're not necessarily going to be giving you the solution, but they'll very easily be able to show you where the problem is. So that's a great place to look for innovation. So the thing that we can do is we can innovate in these areas and we can do research with the customers that we have to see whether or not those innovations satisfy their needs, whether they improve costs or efficiencies or reliability. And this is a great thing because finding research and getting response from people about a new innovation sometimes is very difficult to do or it costs a lot of money. But if you're already in business and you already have customers or you already know who your customers are going to be, you can do some market research with them to see whether or not your innovation is going to work well. Sometimes it's just a survey. Sometimes it's actually, here, try it out, test it, see if you like it. And sometimes it's a matter of providing a service that they've never had before and seeing whether it's something they value. But this is a great place to get feedback. You want to listen to what they have to say. Of course, they'll tell you about the problems, but they'll also tell you whether or not your innovation truly does provide value for them. If it doesn't provide value, then there's nothing there to share, which means you don't have a business. So you want to hear what the customer says. It's really, really important. And you want to let them drive your innovation. If the innovation isn't valuable, then step away from it. Go a different direction. Let the customer drive you toward the direction of innovation that really works best for them. That's the innovation direction that'll work best for you. The last thing you want to do is think that you know what they want, unless you happen to be incredibly clever. There are some people who do that, but there's not many. So that's basically one of the best ways to find places where innovation is going to be effective. So to expand on that idea, let's talk about the size of a market, the volume of sales in a market, and how that affects your competition. So if a market is valuable, that means you have the ability to not only make money, but prevent competition from taking away the source of your income. One way to break that down is by looking at high volume markets and small volume markets and see how those are affected by competitive forces. So in a high volume market, that's going to attract very powerful players, people who have access to a lot of capital, can build buildings, can build equipment, can develop new technology, new products, can hire lots of people. So these are powerful players. So how do you beat those kind of people? Well, you can do it. We've already talked about some examples earlier in this class, where people are innovating in automobiles and coming up with ways to beat very, very large corporations. Also, the same thing in other markets. So entrepreneurs have the advantage that they bring innovation that the large players don't normally have the ability to address. So how do you use that to your advantage? You move quickly. You want to move very quickly in order to keep the competition from catching up with you. If you've got an innovation that provides a substantial advantage against these large competitive players, you want to leverage that advantage as best way you can, as fast as you can. You need to build protection barriers as well. You need to acquire customers as fast as you can. And you can't do that unless you have access to a lot of capital. You need to spend money on research and development, market research. You need to do marketing. You need to do sales. You need to have customer relationships activities, on and on and on. There's so many things you have to do, and you have to do it fast, which means you have to spend lots of money. So this is an approach that requires a lot of capital. At the end of the day, you're probably going to end up competing on the basis of cost. If you can't provide a low-cost solution to a market or a high-value solution to the market, in other words, the value that people are receiving relative to the costs they're paying is high, then you're not going to survive. There's no doubt about it. These powerful players are going to beat you out of the market so they can have the market. So you have to find some way at the end of the day to compete on the basis of cost. All right, you have to take sort of the Sam Walton Walmart approach to winning in these high volume markets. That means, as you saw with Sam Walton, that you have high volume sales and low profit margins. Your profit margins are going to be very, very slim in order for you to maintain your customer base. On the other hand, if you look at a small volume market, you'll find that it's really not attractive to the big players. That's a place they don't play well. Their advantages is in the fact that they have access to a lot of money, and they can gain a lot of resources by building buildings, buying facilities, hiring lots of people, spending tons of money to acquire markets. So they're not interested in small volume markets. So that's a great advantage you have right from the beginning. If you're an entrepreneur, you can compete in markets where it's more of a level playing field. Because in those low volume markets, you're going to have other entrepreneurs and other small companies that are less efficient to compete against. Low volume markets, by their very nature, need high profit margin. You need to make enough money to pay for the investment that you put into the business in order to build that market. So you need high profit margin. And that's key also for raising capital for building your company. Fortunately, most of these low volume markets require substantially less capital. You're not going to be building a fleet of aircraft to build FedEx when you're just building an app to go on a cell phone. So that's a great thing. Think about the amount of capital. The best businesses require no capital or very little capital if you're a startup. And basically, at the end of the day, you're trading hours for dollars. You know, it's not a bad idea. When you're a startup, you can come up with lots of hours. You know, it's going to be easy for you to trade your hours for your dollars at the end of the day. But the problem is this: you don't want to go toward a business that does nothing more than directly turns hours to dollars. You want your hours to be multiplied in value. You need a multiplier effect that turns your hours into lots of hours so that you get lots of hours, lots of dollars or lots of revenue back from the hours that you invest. And there's a lot of ways to do that, but they're all called multipliers. So we have to look for businesses that have a multiplier effect in order to make it worth our time and our effort. So that's what we're looking for as entrepreneurs. And ultimately, of course, all small volume markets can become high volume markets. When that happens, it's great. You can grow with them. You want to identify them early, get in, move fast. Once they get there, you're going to have competition. You're going to be back upstairs here on the high volume market area. Now that we've determined how to find problems and we've determined whether or not problems are in fact addressing a real need that can be turned into a marketable solution and therefore business, we want to also measure whether or not that solution, that innovation in the problem we're addressing are valuable to us. Now remember we said before we have to create value for our customer, and that value has to be new value, additional value, so that it can be shared. They have some of the value, we have some of the value. But let's talk about the amounts of value. Basically, is it enough to have any value, any business that produces value, any innovation? Of course not, because some innovations are only going to produce a tiny amount of value, no matter how sustainable and reliable they are. So we need to ask some questions. What is our overall revenue objective? What are we trying to accomplish from a financial perspective as entrepreneurs? So I ask a really quick, easy question. Is it enough to feed our family, or is it enough to feed the entire country? That's a big difference. And those are two completely different types of businesses, two different types of problems we're solving. Some businesses will produce enough value that you can, in fact, feed your family, and you can do so nicely. On the other hand, there are, in fact, problems in businesses providing innovative solutions around those problems that produce enough value to feed an entire country. So how do you decide which of those do you want? And maybe something in the middle. It all goes back to looking at your internal passion goal. If you don't have an internal passion goal, then maybe we shouldn't be starting a business anyway. But if you do have one, or you think you have one that can be, or an idea that can be developed into one, then we need to choose to solve a problem that is suitable to meet our internal passion goal. So for example, if your internal passion goal is to raise a family that's healthy and happy, and where the children have an opportunity to go to college like yourselves, then, a company that produces enough to do that is sufficient. We don't need to solve a problem that's going to feed an entire country. But on the other hand, if you are a person who wants to do that, or who wants to change the entire world, make the whole world a better place, then you've got to be looking for a completely different problem to solve. The innovation needs to address a problem that's going to produce a huge amount of revenue. And there's a whole bunch of problems associated with that, of course. So we have to go back to our internal passion goal, look at that carefully, and then say, well, let's find a problem that's going to address that. Or let's find a solution, an innovation, and a business model around a problem that's going to solve that. And what I mean by that is the problem could be global in nature. It could be huge. But maybe the solution we're bringing to solve that problem is wrapped into a business model that's really only enough to take care of our family. Now, you can think about that in a different way. Another way to look at this is let's talk about services versus products. When you have a business that provides a service, more often than not, it's not going to produce as much revenue as one that produces products or have the potential to do so. So a service business idea might be, haircuts, entertainment, repairing motorbikes, maybe being a travel agent to help book vacation holiday travel, doing trash collection, building a website or designing a website, doing surgery, or maybe providing banking services to customers. So these are all services. They all have one thing in common, which is they don't have what I call a multiplier. In other words, you can't service a large number of customers at the same time. Haircuts, for example, you can only cut one person's hair at a time. That's a service, and it's very limited in capability. Now you might say, oh, I'm going to open 100 places that cut hair, and I'm going to hire 10 people at each one of those places. Okay, now we've got a multiplier. 10 people at 100 places, that's 1,000 people working, doing the same job, cutting hair. That's a multiplier. But you see what I'm saying? In general, services don't necessarily lend themselves easily to building a large business and one that's sufficient to, say, feed an entire country. But certainly they're sufficient to feed a family. Products, on the other hand, are businesses that easily scale to provide high multipliers. Like, for example, manufacturing toilet paper, producing coffee, building furniture, actually manufacturing scooters or motorbikes instead of repairing them, manufacturing cell phones, manufacturing computers, aircraft, ships. So these things, we have businesses that produce multiple items per year. In the case of ships, it's not a lot, but they're very extremely expensive, very high dollar value. And then toilet paper, obviously very low dollar value per item, but we can produce literally billions of them per year. So products give us an opportunity to build in multipliers that will enable us to get to the point where we can feed an entire country. So these two business lines, service versus products, obviously create completely different business models and different outcomes. So let's think about, in terms of our internal passion goal, which approach works best for us. Now you can say, well, I know that services work well for feeding my family, but I kind of like the idea of building computers. Well, you can still do that, but I can tell you that the people who are building computers are going to want to build them by the thousands, by the millions. And it's going to be very difficult for you to compete in that business because of the economies of scale, unless you do the same. And of course, that's extremely hard to do, hard to compete against people who are already doing that. So when I say choose a business opportunity that meets your passion goal, I really mean it. If your primary objective is and passion is feeding your family, you're just not going to have the strength and the passion and the energy that's necessary to compete with large giants in the computer business to build millions of computers just so you can feed your family. So what you see on this slide is a variety of different types of businesses. There are many types of businesses, as you know, but I've listed on the left here a number of service businesses, and on the right, a number of product businesses. So for example, on the service side, you might have cleaning, maintenance, repairs, education, shipping, plumbing. On the product side, you might have food, clothing, appliances, houses, cars, toys, computers, etc. So you can tell that the big difference is on the right-hand side, there's a physical product that's being delivered, and on the left-hand side, there's a service that is providing value to customers that is not represented in the form of a physical product. In the middle, I've listed some businesses that combine services and products, like a restaurant. They deliver food, but it's not the same as food you might cook at home. It comes with the service of they cook it, they deliver it, they clean up the table afterwards. So there's a service in combination with the product. Same thing's true in a coffee shop. And maybe a web designer in construction. They don't just deliver a website, they actually provide the service of working with you to try and figure out the best way to design it. Down at the bottom, you see 3 points. Many are geographically constrained. That's true of almost all of these businesses. Normally, businesses have only a certain amount of reach they can sustain over a long period of time in order to keep their business going. And that geographic constraint is one way to naturally eliminate competition. For example, coffee shops. I'm amazed at how many coffee shops there are in Vietnam and how close they are to each other. But it just so turns out that you cannot sustain multiple coffee shops in about the same location. It's just not possible because the customers split their loyalty between the shops and neither shop makes enough money. So coffee shops get separated geographically so that they provide service to a relatively small territory. And all that's true for almost every one of these businesses, with the exception that they may provide well-differentiated products, and so they don't care whether or not somebody else is nearby. But even then, there's going to be some geographic constraint usually. Very few companies are global. There's a lot of businesses, as I mentioned in the middle, that bundle both services and products. And oftentimes that happens when you sell the product and then you sell with it, either with an additional cost or built into the original cost, some service. The service might be training, or it might be maintenance, or it might be repair, something like that. So a combination of product and services sold together are actually the best kind of businesses. And another thing that is really important is what we call the multiplier. The business multiplier basically says that once you have developed the product or service, you have a way to sell it multiple times over and over and over again. So that's clearly an issue or a value that comes in with physical items, products like cars or appliances or buildings or computers. You can build these things using exactly the same design over and over and over again with the same manufacturing facility. And so that allows you to multiply your investment and get a value in the long run, which is much greater than the cost of actually building the first one. That's not necessarily true for a lot of these services, but it's not necessarily the case because services require that you build a capability and infrastructure to support that capability in order to provide the service. And so companies that invest in building up a capability in order to provide a service will in fact be able to sell that service over and over again based on that capability. Now, a good example of that might be education. So you hope that when you build a class like this one, that you'll be able to eventually sell the class and to sell it over and over and over again without the trouble of having to build it fresh every time. Another would be maybe in entertainment. You could actually design, write, and produce a movie, and that movie could be sold many, many times over and over again. So that's another way to make money in the service side without worrying about a multiplier. You have a multiplier built in automatically. Um, Doing things like cleaning, it's a little tough on that one because you can only normally clean one place at a time, and the overhead necessary to do that is not very high. Obviously, you need to hire the people, you need to train them, you need to provide them supplies, but that's not a substantially high investment that you're expecting to get a lot of return on. So in a business like that, you're largely selling labor and you can only sell it one customer at a time. That doesn't have a high multiplier. Another one might be providing a haircut service or, working with a salon. You can only service one customer at a time. If you provide a haircut, you might invest in your training and your education. You might invest in buying some tools like scissors, clippers, things like that. But those are, again, relatively modest investments. And so there's not a strong multiplier there in those businesses, especially compared to something like, for example, clothing, where you can literally manufacture thousands and thousands of jeans daily and ship them to America. Um, so having a bit of multiplier is really important. That's a very valuable thing. So once we've identified the problem that we want to solve that's suitable for our needs, it meets our internal passion goal, and we have an innovation that we believe will provide a business opportunity that is viable, we need to figure out how to make it work, how to put it into action. And this is a 10-point process described here, step by step, of going through that. So I'll just walk you through that step by step without going into a lot of details. First thing we want to do is research what other people are doing. Find out how they're solving the problems so we know what we're doing and how it's different. Maybe we can learn from them. The second thing we want to do is identify the resources that can be applied to solving the problem. We have to find out what's needed in terms of people, equipment, money, time. What do we need in order to bring a solution to the market? Then we need to collect research data by reading and talking with people, maybe doing some official surveys, things like that. Listen to how other people are solving the problem. They might have some ideas for us. Maybe they can think of some, maybe they're already trying some of them. But if we listen to other people, especially our customers, we're going to learn a lot about ways to solve the problem. Then we can brainstorm. Once we've collected our research information, we've listened to others, and we figured out what our resources are that we can bring to the party, then we can brainstorm and innovate some solutions. Brainstorming means we're just randomly thinking of unstructured ideas that we might be able to use to apply. After we have a few good ideas, then we can explore them. We can actually do some of the ideas, turn them into innovation, and test them, see whether they work or not, at least conceptually. And then after that, we can identify what do we have to do in terms of real activity and the challenges associated with it to bring the innovation into the market to create the business. So we could list, for example, the challenges that that particular innovation has, or those few innovations that we're looking at. We can look at the risks. Maybe we can't get certain materials or certain equipment, or it's going to be challenging to train people, or things like that. We can identify the cost in terms of the actual amount of equipment and supplies and people that are required to bring the solution to market. We can list out the resources. We can come up with a schedule, show what it would take to bring it to market week by week, month by month. We can identify the competition. We can look at regulations, laws that are required to be satisfied for various innovations. Ultimately, come up with a clear list of equipment and the type of facilities we need to bring those innovations to market. And with all that in mind, we can now start to work on building a business model and a financial model to test the business solution. The financial model, by far, is the most powerful tool to determine whether or not an innovation and its application to a particular market problem is going to be worthwhile. I use them all the time. I wouldn't start a business without one. Then through that, we can also identify some parameters that will be important for us to monitor, and problems that we might have, and some mitigation strategies we would put in place to address those problems. Basically, we want to find ways to eliminate risk where we can and mitigate it otherwise. And then finally, we'll make a choice. Once we have listened, found some problems, collected market research, found ways to innovate solutions on a variety of problems, identified all the elements necessary to build a business plan and the models, come up with our risk mitigation strategies, we can choose. We can make a choice on which particular innovation we believe is the right one for us. It's the one that has probably the least amount of risk with the highest degree of probability of helping us make our internal passion goal. Now that we've determined which problems we want to solve, which market we want to address, what solution we want to bring to the market, in order to actually commercialize it and make it work, we've got to commit. This is where a lot of the courage comes from. We need to commit to developing the particular innovation and following a path that directly achieves our business plan and brings that value to a customer base. If we don't commit and put our life and our time and our energy into that direction, it will never happen. It'll never be successful. We'll never have the ability to grow along that path. So committing to the innovative path is the first major step to commercializing. And basically that path is a long path. It could be years. It probably will be years. But it is a path that's comprised of lots of little problems. Tons and tons of little problems that have to be solved. After all, we're stepping into the unknown. We've never been there before. We're going to be learning very fast by basically encountering problems, sometimes failing, but in the end, ultimately succeeding and learning. So each step we encounter where we find a problem, we're going to create a solution. And that solution needs to be part of the knowledge of the company, the in-company knowledge. So if you are the chief problem solver as the entrepreneur, the next thing you do after you solve a problem is to teach others how to do it. You want to make sure your employees are your best knowledge base in your company. They know how to solve the problems that have been solved before. And that enables you to solve problems quickly, and more efficiently in the future. Basically, you're building company knowledge, expertise, and capabilities. That's what creates value in the company in the long run. A tendency is to get lost in this process and not decide efficiently in which problems to address and which solutions to put in place. So we always have to stay focused. We need to always come back to our internal passion goal and our business model and make sure that we're going down the same path at all times, headed in the same direction for the same end goal. And so all the solutions we put in place need to basically line up at the end of the day to produce the long-term goal of the company and the long-term goal of the internal passion. If we do this, then obviously the customer is going to receive some value in the long run. We're going to deliver the value that we've created by solving these problems to our customer, and hopefully to lots of customers. And each one of those customers, by receiving that value or sharing in it, are going to share some of that value with us. And that's in turn what causes us to make money. They pay us because we've solved problems for them. We solve all these problems ourselves. Now we're allowing them to use our expertise and our capability, whether it be delivering a product or delivering a service. This is what creates the relationship with the customer. Ultimately, the customer, if they're satisfied with the way you've helped them in solving their problems, they're going to continue to allow you to help them solve their problems, assuming it's cost effective for them. They will continue to pay you. It's the way we build businesses. But of course, unless we're improving constantly, we will lose out to competition. So along the way, we must constantly be monitoring what we're doing, collecting information, analyzing our effectiveness, reevaluating what we're doing, and asking the question, how can we do this better? As we get better and better along the path of innovation, it'll be more and more difficult for people to compete against us because we have a tremendous amount of knowledge and skill that enables us to be very effective very quickly that they will never be able to develop easily themselves. Okay, so once we've committed to our idea of innovation and our market approach and our problem solving, we're now going to think about growing the company. And growing the company basically says we're going to do what we said in the previous slide, but we're going to make it more of a formalized structure and process in the company than before. So we're now moving away from the startup phase and more into the small and medium-sized enterprise phase. So over a long period of time, as the company grows, it's going to be building more and more knowledge and skill and expertise, and the capabilities that it has to serve the customer is going to grow as well. Those relationships presumably will deepen over time, or at least the reputation of the company will grow in time, and therefore its ability to bring in new sales and new customers. Over time, any relationship that the company has with customers is also likely to grow because of that value that it's providing, assuming it's that type of market. If it's a market where the customer is a repeat customer and you're constantly getting better and offering better quality service at lower cost, of course they're going to continue to work with you. The only way to do this, though, is by continually learning and innovating and improving. You've got to institutionalize that, make that a regular part of the culture and the activities of the company itself. And one way to do that is by making sure that you build formal structures and processes at every critical point in your business flow so that you can collect data and analyze it. You want to make sure that you have accounting data, you have production data, you have quality control data, all sorts of data that's necessary to make sure you optimize each and every step in your process of production. So you're measuring physical parameters to collect data. You're also collecting information from your customers by getting indirect feedback and direct feedback, maybe by using surveys if you have enough customers to take that approach. And you also want to listen to your employees and your suppliers as well. Your employees will more often than not complain about things that aren't easy for them or not very productive or not working well. They will also be oftentimes the best source of your next innovation or good idea. They are the ones who are going to be creating the best solutions. Your suppliers in the same. Your suppliers are trying to get as efficient as possible, and they will bring you great ideas about ways you can work with them more efficiently too. Another way you can get great ideas about improving and collecting data to build your better processes and structures is by listening to your competition, studying what they're doing, and reading outside publications. These are all things that can be done and should be done on a regular basis in an institutionalized way, in a regular way that makes you run your business more efficiently. Ultimately, this boils down to making sure that you reward your employees, everyone, the workers, the management, even your suppliers, for continuously improving their processes that they work with, coming up with innovations. So you want to reward them for documenting things that they have done to improve processes and steps. You want to make sure that you provide budgets to people who are doing innovative things and creating improvement processes. You want to make sure you give bonuses to your employees and management, incent them to constantly be improving things and to document their improvements. You want to also review results on a regular basis, make sure that the results are in line with expectations, and ultimately, of course, bonuses, raises, and awards copiously to everyone. So now with this slide, we're pretty much finished in talking about innovation. I've shared with you a lot of thinking about innovation, basically what it is, various forms of it, how it's different depending on how you're approaching the problem. We talked about applying innovations to problems, how to find problems. We've also talked about turning those innovations and those problems into businesses, how to determine whether or not the innovation in combination with the problem is valuable enough to meet your personal business goals as well as your internal passion goals. We've also talked about ways to commercialize them and grow the innovation. We've finally resulted in talking about ways to institutionalize that in your company. So basically, we have gone through the whole discussion about conceiving, commercializing, and growing innovation at this point. It's time now to move into our last section on the business plan. So if you would like to take a break, this would be a good time to do that, and you can come back. You can take a break by simply tapping on the little speaker icon near the top.